Good afternoon. Welcome to another edition of our virtual Art and Focus series, where we follow up on our in-person gallery events by coming on Arts and Minds Live to talk about one artwork that is currently on display in our galleries. The focus for today's selection is another work from our ongoing exhibition for which it stands. If you've watched the past couple of Art and Focus events, you know what I'm talking about. But this time we are switching from the Bellarmine Hall galleries to the Walsh Gallery. So as a reminder, for those of you who have not heard about this exhibition, we are running it through July 2026. So if you're local to Fairfield, Connecticut, you are more than welcome to stop in and take a look at the exhibition. The Bellarmine Hall galleries have the earlier chronological part of the For Which It Stands show, and the Walsh Gallery has the secondary, more recent material. So the Celebration of America 250, this is our participation in that commemoration. The show spans World War I to contemporary, with the dress by Maria de Los Angeles is very contemporary in that she has been adding additional squares produced by Fairfield University community members and students just in the past month or so. So the whole show is awesome. We hope you come and take a look at it. If you go down to the Walsh Gallery, you will be greeted by work that begins in 1990, and the most recent artwork is Maria's dress. And if you swing around to the side of the gallery behind the dress, you will find yourself looking along this wall at a print by the artist Julie Mehretu. And that is where we were seated a little while ago. I was joined in the gallery by a group of students from the honor seminar, some of whom might be watching this webinar now if you didn't attend the in-person session. And we chose this work, as with all of our Art and Focus selections, we choose really far in advance. And it's always very interesting to get to know the work once it's arrived, it's in person, it's placed in the gallery, because then it's, of course, in conversation with works that we've put up around it. And there is something also very unusual about this particular selection in the context of an exhibition that is entirely dedicated to American artists interfacing with the American flag. In that, if I go back even 2 slides, as you look around the Walsh Gallery or as you look around the Bellarmine Hall Gallery, you will notice the repetition of the visual imagery, the very recognizable American flag, somewhere in all of these objects. In some places, it's a little bit more hidden than in others. But in Julie Mehretu's print, it's so hidden as to seemingly not be there at all. So one of the things I was discussing with the group who was in the gallery is I was asking them, to see, is this a case of, oh, spot the flag? Are we intended to kind of piece together? We see bits of blue at the upper right-hand corner. We see splashes of red. What is going on here? Obviously, if you can assume that if the artwork has been selected for a show like For Which It Stands, surely there must be a flag connection somewhere. But before we think about what the flag connection might be, I wanted to introduce some close-up high-resolution images just so we can sink our eyes into the visual imagery that the artist has given us. And I will say that this is a case where viewing it on a screen as opposed to in the gallery actually has some advantages. I mean, it's a reasonably large print. The gallery lights are fairly low for this exhibition because of the needs of artworks, not just this one, but others. And it's also behind plexiglass in its frame. So there's a certain sense of remove that you feel standing in front of it. And then I also always notice the interaction of the plexiglass surface with the gallery lights. It's a little bit unavoidable, but it also means that you are, working through this additional layer to see all of the marks that the artist has left on this object that you're looking at. And if you've heard the name Julie Mehretu before, you might associate her more primarily with painting than printmaking. But with these sort of frenzied collections of marks that we are seeing, the traces of activity covering nearly every inch of the surface of the artwork in front of us. And I was also inviting our participants in the gallery to think about, all right, if we can't immediately spot a flag, like we might be primed to do because it's been included in this exhibition, what do we put our eyes on? Like, where do we look? What do we notice? And what they remarked on, unsurprisingly, looking at this bottom half of the composition, the mark making. One student immediately said chaos is what came to mind, or I think he said chaotic. And I think that is a great word to keep in mind in looking at this print, not only in terms of the visual experience we're having, but also potentially the meaning behind it. But we also noticed that the colors underneath the black mark making are very warm. So we see sort of peachy oranges and sort of pale to translucent colors on this bottom half. Moving up to the top half, it is darker. It is more smudged through with these the black tones, but then we get these bright pops of pink and of blue and of that warmer color flooding up from below. And it really does confuse in a certain way. And yet at the same time, it's amazing how a seemingly chaotic visual image like this one, it doesn't seem to push you away. There's something about the color relationships that at least I find very welcoming. I find very harmonic in some strange way, even as the mark making is frenetic. The colors I find very appealing. And of course, everyone is going to react to seeing this in the gallery in a different way. And you on the screen may not find this as appealing and welcoming as I do. But it is still worth thinking about in the context of the show like the one we're doing. What is this thing doing here? How does it have any relationship to the artworks that surround it? And of course, as I mentioned to the group in the gallery, we would want to ask, well, is there any clue to be found if we can't find it in the visual experience immediately? Can we find any clue in what the artist chooses to call this object? And we see the title of it is Corner of Lake and Minnehaha. We see that it's from 2022. In terms of the kind of artwork it is, we're not looking at a painting, but rather a screen print, and very specifically, a 17-run color screen print. So if you are familiar with the printmaking process, which one of our visitors in the gallery had done printmaking and screen printing in the past, even if you hadn't, if you've ever worn a t-shirt with a screen printed logo on it, you've probably engaged, perhaps unknowingly, with some product of the commercial side of screen printing. It is one method for producing artwork in multiples, for making prints. And this particular print was produced in an edition of 45 in conjunction with Walker Art Center and also Highpoint Editions Press, which is located in Minneapolis. And indeed, the title Corner of Lake and Minnehaha, depending on where you're from, that might immediately read to you as it sounds like an intersection. Not all of the folks in the gallery have immediately made that connection, but I bet if you put Lake and Minnehaha into Google Maps, it might be able to take you to a place. And if it did, you would find that that place is Minneapolis. And if you heard or read on the wall label that Julie Mehretu was inspired to create this object after the events of the summer of 2020 in Minneapolis, you might immediately start making connections to the death of George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, the protests and events that followed that animated the Black Lives Matter movement, which of course had existed long before, but really found impetus in the summer of 2020 after that tragic murder. You might begin to sort of draw those threads together. But I don't think you could necessarily say, oh, I see, I understand. I understand where the flag is in this particular artwork, which again is the theme of our show. So I was discussing with our visitors in the gallery, and you may all have thoughts on this that you wish to share. Contemporary art, often we expect that it should be able to stand on its own as an art object, as an object of visual experience. We should be able to walk up to a piece in a gallery, in a museum, and the artist should have provided something to engage with us that wouldn't necessarily rely on outside intervention. There are, I'm sure many of you have visited museums where the contemporary art has no interpretive label on the wall. It has information about what you see here, who did it, when, what's it called, what's it made of, and that's all. And they leave you to have your interaction with the art object. Especially when artwork made that has a connection to social protest, for example, it seems that the artist needs you to make those connections more, or needs there to be a bit more of that contextual embedding to get a sense of where they're coming from. And in this case, I think by giving it the title Corner of Lake and Minnehaha, the artist is hoping that perhaps either the museum that puts this artwork on view or the viewer who encounters it in some context, they're going to do the extra legwork to put together what exactly is being referenced here. Where should we be putting our attention? And I see that Carmen has commented, I see a person in profile wearing a scarf. Oh, that's interesting. Now I'm going to be looking for the person in the scarf wearing in profile. And please let me know if you see something else here. I mean, this is truly, from what we're seeing, without any further context, this is abstract art. It is one of the only examples of abstract art that is in this particular exhibition. I will show you another example a little bit later. But going back to what I just said, the idea that Julie Mehretu expects you to do a little more. You see what you see, and in the context of the show about the flag, you might not be able to make a visual connection, but You think, okay, corner of Lake and Minnehaha, this has got to mean something. It's related in some way to the riots after the death of George Floyd. Where am I going from here? And if you visit the gallery, it will explain this on the label that, in fact, the point of departure for this artist to produce this print is this photograph, which was taken on the corner of Lake and Minnehaha streets in Minneapolis in 2020 by a photographer named Julio Cortez, who was there working for the Associated Press. He was covering the events following the death of George Floyd. And for this photograph and a group of others that he took, he received the Pulitzer Prize for photojournalism in 2021. So these photographs were immediately widely shared and known. And then, of course, having received the Pulitzer Prize, they became even more widely known. And in some way, Julie Mehretu saw this photograph, and this is the one of the group, and he took a number. And I recommend if you look up Julio Cortez 2021 Pulitzer Prize, you will see the whole suite of photographs on the Associated Press's website. This is the one she is drawn to. So we are looking at a figure in profile. Carmen had mentioned seeing a profile in the image we just saw from Julie Mehretu, but in the photograph, there is someone in profile walking down a street. In the background, a liquor store where it says Minnehaha Lake Wine and Spirits ablaze. And we see that fire is even, looks like it's arcing along the power lines, even though the street light is lit. We also have this light coming from this inferno. And the person who's walking down the street is carrying an American flag. And the American flag is both backlit by the flames of that liquor store and also significantly is positioned upside down, which many of you well know is a distress symbol. So it's an incredibly powerful image. It is a great reminder of the power that photojournalists have, or the gift that they have in capturing these split-second moments, things that are not by any means posed or staged, but they are capturing just that perfect shot, perfectly composed, and of course, well-deserving the Pulitzer Prize. Julie Mehretu, as an artist, is seeing this, and she wants to use this as fuel in some way. It is not, again, immediately apparent, I would say, exactly how she's doing that. And that is, of course, by design. She's not merely trying to do a spin-off or a response to this photojournalist's work, but she's using it in some way as an object that can be transformed. And for the next portion of this, I am going to rely on the capable words of a member of the Fairfield University faculty. Those of you who have visited the show know that spread throughout our wall labels are wall labels that have a star on them. And those were contributed by other members of the Fairfield University faculty who have expertise that is complementary to our own and had something to say that would add to your understanding of the artwork in front of you. In this case, looking at a pretty complicated printmaking object, we turned, of course, to our capable professor of printmaking, Joe Yarrington. And I've excerpted a bit of what is on the wall label from Professor Yarrington, giving us a sense of what actually is happening here in terms of process. So if you don't mind, I'm going to walk through that with you in a few separate slides. So she starts by pointing out, quote, Mehretu cropped and blurred the image, then flipped it upside down. The photograph has a coarse appearance due to an enlarged dot screen, a method used in industrial printing where all colors are approximated through dots in 4 colors: cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. The dots vary in size in accordance with the colors they seek to replicate, but are regularly spaced in 4 interlocking grids. And in fact, if you look closely at the object, you will see the sort of dot matrix effect when you really zoom in on it. So the first thing effectively that she's done, she's taken the photograph and she has immediately sought to transform it so that it is nearly unrecognizable. She crops it, she blurs it, and she flips it upside down. So no surprise that we cannot immediately find a burning liquor store or a protester or an American flag. Very much by design on the part of the artist, but she is not done. She has made that effectively sort of the base of the image that we're looking at. And now we're moving into really thinking about the screen printing process over this image. So working on these clear sheets that can be printed individually, each of which are called screens. Over this image, Mehretu drew 3 layers of black addenda or additional color enhancements, each for a different screen, which each screen then printed in a different black: yellow black, purple black, and flat black. Now, I confessed to the assembled folks sitting in the gallery, I am not an artist. Professor Yarrington is a practicing artist and a printmaker. Her level of understanding of how this process works is so much more materially connected than my own. I think I joked in the gallery that to me, screen printing is sort of akin to wizardry in the way that these multiple levels of mark making are built up on the same printing surface. And when you've seen a screen printed t-shirt, I mean, even if it just has two colors, each color is printed separately. That area of the image is applied to a different screen, and the fabric or whatever it is pulled through the process, the screen printing process separately. This print involves 17 different layers that go through the printmaking process to produce one individual image. And then the whole process was repeated 45 times, which is incredible. We're not done. Sorry, there was one more thing I needed to say. Oh, right. I brought in another one of the close-ups. If you look toward the left margin, for example, in that sort of tawny colored area, you can definitely make out that sort of dot matrix effect of the underlying photograph that she's used and transformed. Now, where the eye of an artist is so different from the eye of an art historian, when Professor Yarrington is describing the different colors of black that she's printing with, I am taking that as read and as given because I can't spot yellow black printing versus flat black. So I would have to really look at this in conjunction with Professor Yarrington standing next to me pointing it out to really be able to see it. But I'm fascinated that that is the level of precision that has gone into selecting these printmaking screens. She's choosing to ink in different colors, even of the color that seems to dominate the field the most. And we're not done. Small bursts of color were sporadically placed on top, a flickering halo surrounding pinpoints of intense light. Her last layers, so imagine we're at 15, 16, 17, were focused on mark making, with each screen executed with a different drawing technique. Airy airbrush strokes, feathered marks reminiscent of Sumier brushwork, and a computer dither drawing, which produces spray paint-like splotches and clean-edged wormholes that evoke an overuse of Photoshop's eraser tool. Now that absolutely goes back to that sense of sort of a chaos of mark making that appears on the surface. And yet, as she notes, there are these different sort of styles of brushwork. We have areas that seem sort of calligraphic. When she's saying Sumier brushwork, think Japanese painting of ink on paper painting. I see at sort of the lower left edge, these white areas do look almost spray painted onto the surface. I do see sort of dead center here, almost a perfect circle. Maybe that's sort of the wormhole effect that she's talking about. And I see an echo of that further up to the right. All of these different mark making processes on successive printing layers is kind of incredible to the mind to think about. And then the question is, what does it all come together to do? So we're back looking at the full composition, having a sense that we have an artist starting from this photojournalist photograph, digitally almost dissolving it and transforming it, switching it around, and then furiously marking the surface to create this frenetic, overarching pattern of marks. And there's the question, what does it do? And I don't think I have, this is very much open-ended. You are willing or free to comment in the chat box. What do you think it accomplishes? I mean, one of the things I asked in the gallery session, I said, like, can you necessarily intuit from the visual that the artist has given us how she feels about what happened in Minneapolis in the summer of 2020? Like, are you getting an emotional connection? Do you feel that you have a sense of, is she sympathetic toward the protester in that original photograph carrying the flag in front of the burning building? And we had a discussion about what people were responding in the gallery. You may very well have a different element of response. But nonetheless, I think we can agree that this kind of artwork is much more challenging in what it requires of us as the viewer than some of the other artworks that are around it in the gallery, even some of the artworks that are taking up the exact same subject matter. And I want to show something that is on the same wall. It's a few feet away from Julie Mehretu's print. And this is Dred Scott's Emancipation Proclamation, also created, well, it was created in 2020. And it is a photograph. And there's a quote by Dred Scott that is included on the wall label for this object where he links the death of George Floyd under the knee of Derek Chauvin, the police officer. And he said that would not be possible without the legacy of slavery in this country. So both of them are responding to the same tragic death, the same tragic event, and they're doing it so differently. They're taking very different tacks on how to put that into their artwork. Oops, sorry, went back the other way. And for some people, I think they find the openness of abstraction that is very appealing to them. And they find that your eye and your mind can wander and make associations in a way that a work like Dred Scott's is purposely very straightforward, is very much in your face. And there's no need to say what is better than the other. One of the reasons to put both of them in a show like our own is just to show that what happened in 2020 was such an event that rocked our country, that not only regular civilians were moved to protest, moved to action, but you have artists who are then bringing their very different artistic approaches to bear on the same topic. And we want to see what it is that comes out of that. And they're not even the only two artists who are reflected in the show who are making work response to the events of that summer. And Shannon just commented, I think circle or wormhole shows that there is still a cohesive center despite the chaos. I like that interpretation. Yeah, that idea of there's chaos, and I said earlier, like, there's something about the colors and how they are arranged that I don't feel pushed away. I feel welcomed. Again, that might just be a very personal and subjective response, but then you can add to that something like finding the center that can feel very grounding in a artwork that otherwise could seem very untethered to the world around us. I also wanted to add that I was talking to Carrie Weber, who curated this exhibition and is our museum director this morning. And I was asking her to remind me, what was drawing you to include this print in the exhibition? We talked about Dred Scott, but it emerged that in Carrie's mind, this is connected to another artwork in the exhibition that is not in the Walsh Gallery, but is rather up in Bellarmine Hall. She said that she wanted to see if she could find artworks that were abstract or close to abstraction that still fit within the theme, so that it wasn't all representational. And of course, that is challenging because the show is about the American flag. So how do you find artwork that has that abstract element, but still connects to our overarching theme? Going up to the Bellarmine Hall galleries, in this image on the right-hand wall, you see a small painting that is framed with 4 photographs or 3 photographs and a watercolor around it. That is the other artwork that in her mind, in Carrie's mind, she said she saw Mehretu's print kind of in conversation with, even though they're not in the same space. They're separated by many decades and by being response to very different aspects of American history. So Invasion Barge, 1943, made by an artist who is working in the US military and using almost sort of a cubist fragmented language to think about the experience of soldiers who are preparing to launch, not D-Day at this point, but to launch another form of assault or invasion. And she was thinking about how that conveys the chaos of war, how that visual language conveys that breaking apart, that all of those potentially negative emotions. And you see these sort of teeth screaming faces that are broken apart. And then there's the flag. It's only in a little triangle, but it's very much present and there and identifiable. So that just reminded me that, here we are months into this exhibition. And if Carrie and I had not had this discussion this morning, I would not have realized that she was thinking of these two artworks as being in a conversation in some way across space here on our campus, across time. And I never would have put those two together. When I think of what is Julie Mehretu's print in our show in conversation with, my mind goes immediately to Dred Scott, which is right there. But there are lots of different potential connections to be drawn, which is one of the really cool things about visual art, right? And about exhibitions that bring together not so much strange bedfellows, but bring together artworks that perhaps have not been placed in connection or in communication in the past. As a final note, and if anyone has any other comments or responses, feel free to put them into the chat. If you are watching this live, if you are in the Fairfield area, this evening at 6 p.m. in the Walsh Gallery, we are going to be hosting an event called Art Speaks. It is in person only. It does not have an online component. And in this event, we invite anyone who has been moved to create an original work of poetry or of prose in response to one of the artworks on view in the show and wants to read that in a community setting. That's what we'll be doing at 6 o'clock in the Walsh Gallery. So if you're available and interested, I hope you will join us. And if not, we hope to be welcoming you to For Which It Stands through July of 2026. We are open Tuesday through Saturday from 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. and until 8 p.m. every Thursday. And of course, we are free and open to the public. So thank you for joining me today. I hope we'll see you at the next virtual Art in Focus.